The Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild is the 6th installment in this long-running franchise that really should have ended a long time ago. A lot of people really love the first Ice Age, and people even can consider making an argument for the second and maybe the third. But then 4, it started to get a little repetitive and a little stale, and then everybody hated the 5th one. And we assumed that'd be the end of the franchise until Disney, of course, bought 20th Century Fox a few years ago. And with everything else they've done, they've also decided to reboot or make a sequel to pretty much every single franchise 20th Century Fox had made. They already made Home Alone and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which were both horrible. They've got Cheaper by the Dozen coming in a couple months, which will be awful, by the way. And they've got countless others in the works. And now we have an Ice Age sequel, because we don't have enough of those already, The Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild. Instead of focusing on Manny, Diego, Sid, and Ellie, like the previous ones did, well, Ellie showed up in, I think, the third one, but I digress. Instead of focusing on the main trio from the first movie, like every film did, it decided to go a different route and focus on the two possums, Crash and Eddie. For some reason. I've never found these characters very funny before. They're never, like, insufferable or anything. But in this movie, they get a little irritating. It's also rather telling that they couldn't get any of the original voice cast to do this. Because they couldn't get Ronnie Raymond, they couldn't get Dennis Leary, they couldn't get John Leguizamo. They replaced pretty much everybody except for Simon Pegg as Buck Wild. But to be fair, the replacements do an okay impersonation, and their performances aren't that bad. Problem is, they're stuck with a boring and predictable script. This is the same movie you've seen a million times before. Crash and Eddie want to go out on their own, and they do. They find themselves in the lost world that was found back in Dawn of the Dinosaurs. I believe the third movie? And they meet up with Buck Wild, who is... Because Buck and, like, a little group he made, they created harmony in the lost world between the dinos and the mammals. But there's one dinosaur with an unusually large brain. Like, literally, you can see the brain in the back of his head. It's kind of gross. Named Orson, who wants to take it over because he believes that essentially survival of the fittest. Like the strong should dominate the weak. And since he believes he is the strongest, or I guess the smartest, really, he believes he should dominate all of them. Similar to Lex Luthor, except kind of just a generic take over the world plot thrown in there as well. And he has an army of raptors at this point that want to help him basically take over the watering hole, and I guess the rest of the lost world. And so Crash and Eddie team up with Buck, and one of Buck's old pals named Z, to stop him from taking over, while Manny, Sid, Ellie, and Diego are basically spending the entire movie looking for Crash and Eddie. I will give this movie credit that it's only an hour 22, so it doesn't really feel like it wears out its welcome, but I was feeling the boredom settle in pretty quickly. Crash and Eddie are not the most interesting of characters. They're comic relief, similar to Sid. Sid is really obnoxious in this movie. He does nothing but tell annoying jokes. He's like the Olaf from Frozen 2. He's loud, obnoxious, and not funny. And, again, the other characters are just spending the whole movie looking for Crash and Eddie, so their inclusion in the movie is almost pointless after the first 12 minutes. And I do want to talk about something briefly. Back when I did my Eternals review, even the title was "This Proof Critics Are Morons," because they gave it a really bad rating. It was the first MCU to get a film to get bad reviews, even though it was still a really good film. This one is not getting good reviews, don't get me wrong, it's at 25 on Rotten Tomatoes. But one of the critics' quotes really stuck out to showing me it's not just the site. These critics, it's not just all critics, like, they are just fucking stupid. Like, the rest of the quote doesn't matter, but the beginning of it was, "The animation is top-notch." Excuse me? This animation is Norm of the North level bad. I cannot fathom how Disney made this abysmal animation. Diary of a Wimpy Kid looked okay. I mentioned it had problems with the animation, but the animation itself wasn't bad. The animation in this one looks like PS2 freaking cutscene graphics. It looks pretty bad. I literally own PS2 games that look more realistic than this movie. I know it's not supposed to look realistic, and I know the thing with the original movie didn't look that great either, because that was back in 2002. 20 years later, they're making a movie that looks even worse. Although they don't have the weird-looking CGI baby, so at least it gets off on that front. But 20 years later, like, the animation improved with all the other Ice Age films. As bad as they got, the animation was still good. This one, the animation is just flat out abysmal. It looks like the 2002 graphics. Like, everyone made fun of Norm of the North. Like, yeah, this looks like it came out in the early 2000s. It looks kind of like Norm of the North. It really does. It's that bad of animation. The jokes don't get laughed very often. There were a few that every once in a while it got a laugh out of me, but honestly, most of the jokes were just were mostly just Crash and Eddie being obnoxious, or Sid being obnoxious, and that's not funny. I don't find annoying characters funny. I don't think anybody should. Buck Wild is, well, Buck Wild. He's a badass, and honestly, some of his fight scenes were pretty cool. They didn't last very long, but they were neat to look at. Again, the animation sucks, but at least the movements are all fluid. It's trying to look like the other films, but again, it clearly doesn't have the budget for it. But especially this script, it's so predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen. They're going to team up with Buck, they're going to help him take down Orson, and they're going to stay in the Lost World while the rest of them, Manny, Sid, Ellie, and Diego go back to wherever they're living at the port. And you know exactly what's going to happen within the first 20 minutes of this movie. And this movie does a lot of remember this, as in it'll often remind you of things that happened in the other films. And I fucking hate that. I hate when movies do this. There's half the script is reminding people, oh, remember when we did this, remember this? And the movie even opens with a narration catching you up on the first 5 films, which that's not a terrible idea, but then they keep doing it. They keep bringing up the other movies, and it gets a little irritating at times. They don't do it constantly, but they do it enough to the point where I was kind of like, okay, can we just stick to this movie? If we're watching this, we've probably seen the other movies. So I don't know how long I've been doing this. Wow, it's a pretty short review so far. Is there anything else to talk about? The music is almost non-existent. It's really not. I don't know who did the score for this movie, but it's very forgettable. I didn't even really notice the music outside of there was one scene where they're imagining a bachelor's den, which obviously a bachelor pad. If you don't know what that is, look it up. I'm not going to get into it, but you should know what it is. But think of what Barney Stinson lives in How I Met Your Mother. That's a bachelor pad. But I digress. Or Charlie from Two and a Half Men. But again, I digress. But there's this really bad song that plays in the background. It plays during the end credits, too. And it's a really bad song. It's similar to, I don't know, what was it? Was it A Wrinkle in Time? It had the end credit scene had DJ Khaled for some reason. I think Aladdin also had a remix of Friend Like Me with Will Smith and DJ Khaled. It's why? And this movie is this. It's not DJ Khaled, I don't think. But it's a really bad song. And they play it during the end credits as well. So it's no. The climax is your standard animated movie climaxes. A lot of wacky physics, a lot of physics-defying stunts, I guess. Not that great choreography, and the animation really isn't helping either. But I will say this, that I really thought that it was going to do the whole trying to redeem the villain. He's going to join them in harmony, what they want. Similar to what Descendants 3 did, and it was bullshit, where the villain just kind of didn't even really get a slap on the wrist. It was just she can go back to being part of them even though she tried to kill all of them. I thought they were going to do that here. They didn't. I'm really glad. No, instead, he gets carried off by a pterodactyl, and then I think he gets eaten. I don't know. It's not on screen. But I'm assuming he gets eaten by the raptors after getting beat on by the other mammals. So they get their revenge. That's pretty funny. But, yeah, there's not much else to talk about with this movie. pretty forgettable. Is it like it's definitely not the worst Disney Plus movie. Mulan easily takes that, and if you don't want to count Mulan, then Secret Society of Sycamore Royals. Like Disney Plus has had their fair share of shit, and this is definitely part of it. But it's not the worst. It's still better than Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Home Sweet Home Alone. I can give it that. But this was just a boring slog with really bad animation and a really predictable script and characters who just have no impact on the story other than just to walk around for the entire 82 minutes of this movie. So yeah, that's all I got for the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild. I'm giving it a D+. It was definitely better than Hotel Transylvania Transformania, and I don't see the rest of January getting any better. They have Netflix's Royal Treatment, which I've been putting off watching because I was looking forward to it, but then the trailer kind of brought me down. Home Team, I've heard that's really bad, even though the trailer looked okay. But see how that turns out. And then I also have to watch Scream. Not a horror movie fan, so that probably won't be my thing. But yep, I'll see you then.